How far can you shoot with your crossbow? What is the maximum effective range of your crossbow? That's this episode of Death by Bunjie. I've had some comments here on the YouTube channel recently about how you can kill any animal at 50 yards and how you can make 250 yard and 300 yard shots with a crossbow. That's all fine and dandy. It is not something I am interested in, and it is not something that I recommend to you. In addition, I've commented here recently quite a bit about the New York Bow Hunters website. On their website, they talk about the Marlowe report, a report where it says the average effective range of crossbows is 69 yards. There's no question to me that you can shoot a crossbow 500 yards or something if you wanted to. If you aim it pretty much up in the air and shoot it out there, that'll happen. Totally misses the point about crossbow hunting for me though. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this video was to encourage people to both understand that misconception about how far crossbows can shoot, but also to urge you to keep your shots between 30 and 40 yards maximum. I have said this over and over that I don't like taking long shots with crossbow hunting, and I urge you to do the same. And the reason for that, one of the first reasons, is because a lot can happen with distance. Any errors that exist with your equipment or with your own human error are magnified over distance. The longer your shot is, the longer you have, the more time you have for those different errors, those different problems to affect your shot and affect your accuracy. Remember, when we are hunting with a crossbow, when you're shooting a crossbow, you're basically aiming up in the air above your target and it's going to go out and come down. This does not shoot anywhere nearly as flat as a rifle shoots. Rifles shoot much flatter than these. There is no archery equipment on the market that shoots flat, that shoots a straight line. Some faster bows will shoot flatter than other bows, but they all shoot an arc. Okay. Once again, I'm coming inside to show you some stuff on the computer on some websites. I shot a video before about the crossbow speeds and its effect on your accuracy of your shots and recovering animals, that sort of thing. Check out that video if you are interested in that. This website factors into that discussion, so it's important that you check out this website. The website I'm going to show you, and I don't have any connection to this website. There are 100 other websites like this on the internet. Maybe not 100, but there's plenty of other ones to check out. But if you go to the website bestcrossbowsource.com, they have an arrow ballistics calculator that I showed you last week on the video, on the other video about crossbow speeds. If you look at that calculator, you can go on there and you can type in all of the specs as they apply to your crossbow and your arrows, plug them into this calculator, and it will give you some great information about your crossbow and your arrow. I started out with 305 feet per second. Total arrow weight is 370 grains. The reason I typed in that number is because I use a 265 grain arrow, 20-inch arrow from Excalibur. It's the firebolt arrow is what I use. It's a 20-inch arrow that's 265 grains or so, but I add the luminoc to the end, the lighted knock. That adds about 5 grains, so I'm at about 270. And then I hunt with the exact broadhead, which is 100 grains. So that brings my total arrow weight up to 370 grains, and that's what I've typed in there. Fletching length, 4 inches, that's the length of the vanes. I put in a height of 0.45 inches. That's actually what it was set to by default for me, but that's happens to be about the height of my fletchings. And the shaft length, 20 inches. That's the length of the arrow, not including the broadhead. That's the length of the arrow that I hunt with. So 20 inches, I type that in there. It gives me a calculator. Once you hit calculate ballistics, it gives you a calculation, does all of that horrible math for you and tells you based on mathematics how fast your arrow is going to travel. Now, once again, keep in mind, this doesn't take into account wind, rain, branches, any of that jazz, any of the stuff that's going to get in the way of your arrow performing properly. Distance only magnifies those problems. Those are not reflected on this website. This is sort of like shooting in a vacuum, is what it's giving you those figures as though you were shooting in a vacuum. The important things now, in the arrow speed, there's a column there, and you can see that your arrow speed drops significantly over distance. The longer you are shooting, you may have a crossbow like I do that shoots at 305 feet per second, but it doesn't shoot 305 feet per second for 50 yards. In fact, at the end of 50 yards, according to this website, the arrow would be traveling at about 283 feet per second, so it slows down significantly. The other video that I did does talk a lot about arrow speed and discusses that there. And there's some misconceptions, I think, about arrow speed. And I think that there's some excuses that we try to use about arrow speed as though arrow speed is going to fix some of the problems that we might encounter with crossbow hunting, and I don't think it does. This video is about shooting over distance, but this website helps us get some important information on that topic. Look, for example, if you look, there's a couple other columns here that I think are very important when we're talking about shooting or hunting at distance with our crossbows. First of all, I want to talk about the kinetic energy. Your foot-pounds, that's measured in foot-pounds. Kinetic energy is what you need to open up your broadhead if you're using mechanicals like me. Kinetic energy is what you need to get penetration or a pass-through on a deer. You aren't going to get it unless you have adequate kinetic energy. Now, 76 pounds, if we look, right off the end of the barrel of the crossbow, 76 foot-pounds of kinetic energy for a shot at 0. That means when I pull the trigger, 76 foot-pounds of energy is generated by that string pushing the arrow down the rail. That drops down to 74 at 10 yards, 20 yards, it drops us down to 72. It drops down about 2 every spot if you look at it. So it's dropping over distance. That's very important to take into account. Yes, you might be able to hit your target at 50 yards, but you're not hitting it with as much velocity as you would be if you shot it at 20 yards. If you need any illustration of this on your own with your crossbow, just go out in the backyard, set up a target, shoot it at 10 yards, and then walk out to 50 yards and shoot it with another arrow. Leave the first arrow in, shoot a different spot of the target, and then compare the amount of arrow that's sticking out of that target. You will not get as much penetration at 50 yards with any crossbow as you get at 10 yards. It's just not going to happen. It's just the way it is. So that is going to make a big difference. It's slowing down significantly and it's losing energy significantly over distance. It doesn't make an awful lot of difference maybe, and it may be still effective enough on a good shot to kill a deer, but it is a factor to consider. More important to me, however, is arrow drop. If you look at this website, this even shocked me when I looked at it. I'm losing about 2 inches at 10 yards. That means that I'm aiming, and that arrow, remember how I talked before about arrows have to go in an arc with archery? That's what archery is. It's an arc, right? So it's going to go in an arc. That means we're aiming up a little bit. We're aiming high every shot that you take. At 10 yards, I actually have to aim about 2 inches high. Now, you don't do that. That's what your scope is supposed to take that into account for you. You're not going to aim 2 inches high. You're going to adjust your scope properly so that when you're aiming it through the scope, you're actually looking at, when I look at the 10-yard reticle, the crossbow is calculating that 2 inches so that the arrow will hit the target perfectly. It'll make me raise my barrel just a little bit, so when I pull the trigger, the arrow will go down the rail and hit a little bit right on target, but by arcing a little bit high. 2 inches at 10 yards, that's the vertical drop. In other words, the arrow is going to drop 2 inches. But if we look at this website, at 20 yards, it's 7 inches. It's gone from 2 inches to 7 inches worth of drop in just 10 yards. So at 20 yards, we're actually aiming 7 inches high in order to make that shot perfect at 20 yards. At 30 yards, it's 18 inches. 18 inches difference at 30 yards. 40 yards is 32 inches. That means I am actually, again, the scope is going to accommodate me in this, but the scope's going to take that into account. But I have to aim 32 inches high to hit the target at 40 yards. 50 yards, 53 inches. If you're extending your shots out to 70 yards, which if you want to do that for fun, that's one thing, but if you hunt that way, I believe it is totally reckless to shoot a crossbow 70 yards at an animal. At 105 inches of drop, my scope doesn't even go out to that. But that Marlowe report that the New York Bow Hunters cite on their website talks about the average. That means there's some higher, some lower. The average effective range of a crossbow is 69 yards. They are insane. Anybody that thinks that you can shoot an instrument, take a weapon and shoot an arrow with a 105-inch drop that is losing, according to this website, 10 foot-pounds of kinetic energy by the time it gets there and be effective and try and kill an animal, that's the effective range. With a 105-inch drop, that means I have to aim 105 inches high on my target to get the arrow to hit there. 105 inches is 8 feet or something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's an awful lot. Again, that's math. I don't want to do the math. But anyway, I just wanted to illustrate that. Now, you might be thinking, well, if I get a really fast crossbow, I can correct that. So I'll go back to the website. We'll use the same arrow, but we'll type in 400 feet per second. And this is where it's still interesting. I want to point out that speed, it does not fix your problems. Speed is not going to be the answer either. Now, I talked about speed in the other video, but distance is this is the real takeaway, is that your drop, I've gone from 2 inches to 1 inch on 10 yards. I've gone down to 5-inch drop on 20 yards, but it's still a 5-inch drop instead of 7. So with 300 feet per second crossbow, we're at 7-inch drop over 20 yards. With a 400 feet per second crossbow, we're at 5-inch drop. There isn't much difference there. And even with your 400 feet per second crossbow, you're shooting at 70 yards, a 62-inch drop. A 4-foot drop at 60 yards, 45 inches, almost 4 feet. It's still a tremendous drop. And the big takeaway again with this is, and I can't stress this enough, look at the difference between 20 yards and 30 yards. Look at the difference between 30 and 40 yards. When you start getting into 30, 40-yard shots, that drop is tremendous. Everything gets worse over distance, especially after you go 30 or 40 yards. Distance is not your friend when it comes to crossbow hunting, and it's kind of the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish here. So don't be thinking that you're going to show your friends how great a crossbow hunter you are with these long-range shots. Don't take those shots on animals. You're going to more often than not, I believe, be disappointed. You're adding to and you're going to get discouraged, I think, if you take too long of shots, because you're not going to be as effective long distance as you are with the short distance. Even if you disagree with this overall concept, even if you question this math, it doesn't change the fact that you have to agree you're going to be more effective over a shorter distance than you will be over a long distance. That's just a fact. I think everybody agrees with that. So let's focus on making those shots count up close. Let's focus on getting the most out of crossbow hunting by getting up close and personal with the animals that we're hunting. I get a lot of questions on the YouTube channel about shooting the distances. A lot of people come to me and they talk about how their crossbow is set up. It shoots really accurate at 10 yards, 20 yards, and 30 yards, but when they go out to 40 yards or 50 yards, they're off by several inches. I've had comments to that effect here recently, in fact. And I want to tell you, that's nothing to be alarmed or ashamed about. In fact, that's pretty much my experience with this crossbow. I'm very accurate at 30 yards. I don't shoot past 30 yards. So a 40-yard shot, I do practice occasionally and will sight it in at 40 yards. And it's pretty accurate at 40. At 50, it's a whole different ballgame. But the farther you go past 30 yards, the errors with your accuracy are going to grow exponentially. I mentioned this before in a previous video. One of the reasons crossbows are not particularly good at distance is the shorter arrows. We're shooting typically a 20-inch arrow, maybe 22, maybe 18 in some crossbows, but that arrow is shorter and it doesn't handle distance the way a longer arrow will. A longer arrow will maintain stability over a greater distance than a shorter arrow will. I mentioned that in a previous video, and I mentioned how it's similar to the way when you make paper airplanes. If you fold them lengthwise of the paper, it's a longer airplane and it flies in a nice straight line. But if you fold the paper airplane widthwise of the paper, making a shorter airplane like a shorter arrow, it's not going to fly as accurately over distance. There's a few other reasons why distance and crossbows don't mix all that well. One of them is wind. If there is a slight breeze where you are hunting, that breeze is going to affect that arrow even more over distance. I've noticed this personally shooting at targets 10, 20 yards. It makes no difference whatsoever. Even in a little bit of a stiff breeze, I can shoot there and shoot accurately. When I start moving out to 30 yards, I can start to see a little bit of creep in those arrows as they're affected by the wind. They can start moving as much as an inch, even with a relatively slight breeze. You extend that out to 50 yards and you're giving the wind, the breeze, that much more time to affect your arrow's flight. It may not seem like there's much wind where you are, but what about where the deer is? If you're in the brush, in cover, shooting out into an open food plot, for example, there might be a stiff breeze out there that on a long distance shot can affect your accuracy. And we're talking windage, right? We're talking blowing your shot left or right. That can have a significant impact on whether or not you recover that animal. Another problem with longer distance shots is your own human error, your ability to hold the crossbow steady and take a shot. Over distance, any problems with that are magnified. What if your crossbow is not properly sighted in? If you're slightly off at 20, you're even more off at 30. You extend that out to 40 or 50 yards, now you're noticeably off by inches. It's kind of like a funnel. Coming off the end of the crossbow, it's right there. That's the point where that arrow is going to have impact, would be right off the end of the crossbow. But if I'm slightly off, it may not be as noticeable over 10 or 20 yards, but when you get out to 40, 50 yards, now all of a sudden that funnel is spread right out, and the room for that error is spread right out. From time to time, I talk to people who say, I need a quieter crossbow because my deer is jumping the string. I will suggest to you that the volume of your crossbow is less important than the length of your shot when it comes to jumping the string. If you're worried about a deer hearing the crossbow and therefore reacting before the arrow gets there, that is something that can be taken care of with shorter shots. When I go out in the yard and practice, for example, if I set up a target and I'm shooting at 10 yards or 20 yards, I can hear the arrow hit the target instantaneously with the sound of it leaving the crossbow. On the other hand, if I'm shooting at 40 or 50 yards, the pause, the amount of time between me pulling the trigger and that arrow hitting the target, there's a huge gap in there. It's audible. It's something that I can actually hear. You can tell that your arrow is taking its time to get there. Distance makes that gap in time very audible to me as a human being. I can only imagine that a deer at 50 yards, it's going to make a difference. In the end, to me, no big buck is worth it. It is not worth it to me to put an animal at risk and to risk going home without a deer by taking a long shot. I like to keep the shots in. 40 yards and less, 30 yards and less is optimal for me. 10, 20-yard shots are probably the most common shots that I take. And I recommend that you do the same thing. That's my advice as a guy who's, been doing this since 2010 is all. It's not like I have a wealth of experience with crossbow hunting, but I have shot quite a few deer with it. And I've appreciated the crossbow so much that I even went out and wrote a song about it and did a YouTube channel about it. So I have a lot invested in this and do enjoy it and appreciate you watching it an awful lot. And I want to share that information with you. For what it's worth, I recommend a shot at 10 or 20 yards, 30 yards maximum. And to me, that's the fun part of crossbow hunting. People who want to constantly push and see how far they can shoot the crossbow and feel challenged by that, in my opinion, should rethink what the challenge of crossbow hunting really is. It's not distance. If you want to shoot long distance, go get a rifle and shoot a deer at 100 yards. That's not a problem, all right? That's what rifles are designed to do. Archery equipment, to me, a healthier way to look at this, a more consistent and appropriate way to look at crossbow hunting is, the challenge is in making those shots shorter. I like 10, 20, 30-yard shots, and I like to work all season long preparing the habitat to support those shorter shots. That's the challenge. That's the fun part of crossbow hunting. If I turn this into a weapon that shoots long distance, and now all of a sudden I'm shooting deer at long distances, that takes all of the fun out of crossbow hunting for me. Don't focus on that. You are going to appreciate this so much more if you focus on ways to make your shots shorter. It's way more fun. Give me your thoughts on long distance crossbow shots. I'm anxious to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you'll subscribe for more videos from Death by Bunjie. Check out our Facebook page if you haven't done so already. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!
The second state is #1 in my